And ladies and gentlemen, your excellencies, we'll move right to the next debate. We all know that there has been a presidential election in the last year in the United States of America that has been won by the Democratic nominee and now President Joe Biden. Joe Biden is viewed not only by the Americans but by the rest of the world as a symbol of change. And of course, it's a symbol of change also for the relationships between the EU and the USA. The USA is our very vital ally and a friend, but how do we make the friendship, how do we form it into the future? How will we tackle together the questions of Russia and China? How do we do with trade between the EU and the United States? That is the topic of the forthcoming debate about the transatlantic relations under the Biden administration. Well, President Biden has been in office for almost half a year. It's a short time, but I believe a lot has changed, and we'll hear the details about those changes and what they can lead to. And I would ask kindly the moderator of the next debate, the founder and president of Aspen Institute Central Europe, Mr. Ivan Hodáč.
Very much.
Mr. Hodáč, welcome to the stage.
Welcome.
And I think I can already give the floor to you so you can introduce your guests, and we'll move right to the debate that I'm really looking forward to. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jan. Thank you for this introduction. So I don't have to introduce the panel. You already did it. But for the sake of the discussion, it's about transatlantic relations and the Biden administration. The US has written back to the global stage. We hope that we will see a more multilateral approach from the United States, but obviously there are many other things, Russia, China, but a lot will depend on Europe. A lot will depend on how Europe will take it. We have an excellent panel and a very interesting panel because we have somebody from the EU, we have somebody from the US, we have somebody from NATO, and we have two think tanks that are online. And so let me welcome first Ruth Bayada, who is the head of unit for US, or head of division for US and Canada at the EEAS. Welcome, Ruth. We have from the United States, we have Matthew Boyce, Deputy Assistant Secretary from the US Department of Trade, and you have been dealing with this part of the world for a very substantial time. You have been overseeing policies for Poland, Czech Republic, and all the others. And we have Benedetta Berti. Welcome, Benedetta. Benedetta is Italian. Congratulations for the big victory in the European soccer. And she is the head of policy planning unit office of the Secretary General of NATO. And we come to the two think tanks. We have Francis Burwell, distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, and Francis is dealing a lot with the EU-US relations. And last but not least, we have an old friend of this Prague European Summit, a member of also the program committee, Roland Freudenstein, Policy Director, Martin Center for European Studies. Welcome, Roland. So welcome, everybody. Without any further ado, I will ask each of the panelists, in order in which I have presented them, to have opening remarks. Please stick to 3 minutes. We have an hour, so if you stick to 3 minutes for opening remarks, we will have then a discussion among the panelists and with the audience outside. Hopefully somebody is looking at us online, and with the audience here. So why don't we start with you, Ruth? Can we have the sound, please? Sorry, we can't hear. Can you hear me? My God.
Does it work now?
No. Sorry, the sound doesn't work. Ruth? Okay, why don't we...
Can you hear me better now?
Ruth?
think so. That's me. So I might.
Ruth, now I can't see you now.
You cannot see me, but you hear.
Okay, if you sit back and now you, please.
Now you can. Okay, hi. Thanks a lot, and thank you for the pleasure to be with you. And it's a pity that we could not be in the same room to debate in it. I think the reality of today and reality brought us, the working reality that COVID brought us in, I think was very much in mind ahead of the election and when part of on the US side came along and sort of how much changed and also from the EU side the necessity and have a joint response to dynamic global recovery to our challenges in terms of climate change, but also safeguard our multilateral system. How much we actually needed, how much we had West and sort of with that in mind, I think the EU institutions collectively and also together with the member states, how the EU should, what should frame the way forward with the US and the new. And I think that there you would have also of our communication in December and it's offered, how the EU and how is a way forward with the US. I think we had missed the US while we had, steadfast, we held ours also in the multilateralism. Certainly the return of very well. And I think this was much is very much reflected in reflected in discussions at the summit on the 15th of June and the outcome. And I think there is a commitment from both EU and US collectively to first tackle immediate. Like, how do we make get vaccines of the world? There's a commitment to support solutions to trade issues, because we understand that both are pillar of global economy. There is a commitment to issues immediately, but also to have more of a medium and longer term vision of how we work together on trade and technology. What internal we want, what standards we want, but at the same time, how do we secure light and how do we do investments? So I think we have come agreement with the US to set out for tackle immediate issues, medium term, longer term. Agreed to continue our joint work on many issues. Work or is already ongoing in a number of joint statements that we've had on the company. Alignment or agreement on rollout of sanctions or EU side, but also jointly done with the US, like my partners. Certainly, on our side, you have grown in terms of security in the last 4 years, but of the US on NATO is very up from our side, and we're looking to strengthening the EU-NATO and see if we can develop a security and defense dialogue with the US. And lastly, of course, but development. And we look forward to President Biden hosting the summit for peace, and we'll certainly be supportive of this and working with the administration on this, but also in terms of multilateral system. We want how we can ensure the values are protected in multilateral system. I think I will leave it at that introduction. Looking forward to other panelists will stay discussion overall.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ruth, for giving us an overview on the issues on which the EU, US should move together in the EU view, but also in the view of the United States. We will obviously come back to it. Matthew.
I don't want to have to, or are we having, yes, very good. I don't want to have to say.
This is much better.
Yeah, good. So thank you very much for having us and for having us in person. You cannot imagine how much fun it is to actually interact with people in real life as opposed to on the screen. Thank you for organizing this and good to be here. So I should just start perhaps by saying that after his inauguration, one of the first stops that President Biden made was to the State Department, where he said that diplomacy is at the center of our foreign policy. And then it's also no coincidence that his first visit abroad was to Europe. That's how important the Transatlantic alliance is, and strengthen our ties with our allies and partners is to this administration. We believe, and history has shown, that when democracies work together, we can tackle the toughest challenges and secure our future. And the United States is committed to leading with strength and defending our values and delivering for our people. We are, of course, our democracies are underpinned by shared values and interests, which provide rights and freedoms and dignity to all citizens, and that is why wherever human rights are violated, we must stand together. And we do stand together to face many challenges through organizations like NATO. During the recent NATO summit, allies agreed to an ambitious NATO 2030 agenda to adapt the alliance to the threats of today and tomorrow, and to increase funding as needed. And at the US-EU summit, Presidents Biden, von der Leyen, and Michel established a Trade and Technology Council to kickstart a positive economic agenda to grow the transatlantic trade and investment relationship and shape the future of the world economy. The NATO communique and the US-EU statement were equally strong, stressing that our relationship with Russia and the PRC will be competitive when it should be, collaborative when it can be, and adversarial when it must be. That sort of troika is really very important. On Russia, while the United States seeks a more stable and predictable relationship, as President Biden made clear in Geneva, he also said that very clearly when Russia seeks to harm us or our allies, we will respond. Now, China has the power to influence the rules-based international order in favor of autocracies and against democracies. And we've seen that Beijing uses that influence to press our allies and to try to divide us. As President Biden said, we will confront China's economic abuses, counter its aggressive, coercive action, and push back on China's attack on human rights, intellectual property, and global governance. And since we're kind of still in the pandemic, I should probably mention that as well. The United States is very involved multilaterally in the response to the pandemic, donating about $2 billion to Gavi, the vaccine alliance for COVAX. We've committed to share 80 million surplus vaccines and to provide 500 million doses of Pfizer vaccine to Gavi for distribution by COVAX. And our vaccines, unlike others, do not come with strings attached. We are doing this with a singular objective of saving lives. Now, as far as our economics is concerned, we're really focused on delivering economically for our citizens. That's the impetus behind the Build Back Better World, or B3W initiative that was launched at the G7 summit. B3W will generate hundreds of billions of dollars in public and private infrastructure investment in sustainable projects driven by good governance, transparency, and strong standards, and aligned with the net zero by 2050 economy, and keeping the goal of limiting temperature change to 1.5 degrees within reach. And in a similar vein, I just was at the 3Cs Summit in Sofia on Thursday and Friday last week, and both President Biden and Secretary Blinken delivered video remarks at that conference, and I'm happy to talk about that later, underscoring how important infrastructure development in Central and Eastern Europe is to the United States, and how we'd like to partner with the 3Cs member states. As President Biden said, the 3Cs initiative offers incredible potential for increasing cooperation and connectivity that will enhance the security and prosperity of this region, and quite frankly, benefit the world. And the United States will be your unfailing partner at every step. Unfailing partner at every step. This European-led initiative illustrates the power of collective regional neighbors seeking connectivity to strengthen themselves and build resilience through development of the energy, digital, and transportation sectors, and through anti-corruption measures. And together, this is an example of how in this post-pandemic economy we can build back better. Another illustration of what we're doing on the multilateral front concerns the tax negotiations, agreement by 131 nations. That countries on all continents and of varying sizes, representing 90% of global GDP, have recognized that the current global minimum tax rate of 0 has undermined their ability to raise the revenue needed to make critical investments in combat crises like the pandemic. We look forward to working with our partners to level the playing field for businesses and improve fairness for the middle class around the world. So, as you can see, diplomacy and multilateralism are at the forefront of the Biden administration's foreign policy, and both of those start in Europe. So, I think my 3 minutes is over. I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. You have covered quite a field, and you have said one thing which is always on everybody's mind, is the shared values and interests, and everything basically comes from there in one way or another. We go to our next speaker, Benedetta. Benedetta, NATO. NATO is the cornerstone, or one of the cornerstones of the cooperation between the United States and Europe. What is happening in NATO? Is NATO changing in one way or another? What is it?
Sure, and thank you very much for the invitation, and it's always obviously great to be here today, especially in person. It's something that I think we have lost gradually the habit of doing, so very good to be here in person. I'll try to use my 3 minutes wisely and speak on the theme, and of course the previous speakers already talked about the new impetus for transatlantic cooperation. Maybe I'll say a couple more words on the security and defense angle, which is of course where NATO comes in. And I think from my point of view and from where I stand looking at the last summit on June 14, when the 30 allies came together in Brussels, I think that we are in a very significant moment, and we have a real opportunity. There is a real momentum to open a new chapter in transatlantic relations and to really boost our security and defense agenda. And I say this because, of course, we all know that in the past few years, questions have been asked on both sides of the Atlantic about the strength, about the viability of our alliance, about the strength of our bond, with even competing visions emerging about transatlantic relations and Europe's role in the world. And I think this summit was a very important moment, because it was a moment to come together and go back to the basic with a very strong political recommitment. First of all, of course, from the United States coming to Brussels and stepping up as a key ally in NATO, but also with every other 29 allies coming together and basically restating, first of all, yes, we do believe that there is a very important and essential role for the transatlantic relations as embodied by NATO today. Yes, we do understand that our security and defense remains indivisible, and that NATO and the transatlantic framework really remain the only sustainable and real way we have to secure our collective defense and the defense of Europe. So I think it started with a very strong political commitment, and I think this notion of the indivisibility of our security and how we can only face common security and threats together is especially important today because we find ourselves in what I would call the most complex security environment since the end of the Cold War. We face multiple threats, from pervasive instability along our borders to ever more sophisticated cyber and hybrid threats, to more brutal forms of terrorism, to climate change, and then I would say even more substantially, we have to prepare ourselves as an alliance for what is a world marked by the growth and the rise of geopolitical competition. And today, of course, we see a shift in the global balance of power. We know Russia and China are at the forefront of a pushback against the rules-based international order, and that has repercussions for our security, for our democracies, or for our societies. And these challenges are too big for either Europe or North America to face alone, and that's why it was so important on June 14th to come together as a transatlantic community and say, yes, this will be a defining question for the future of our relations, and we want to face these challenges together. And I know I only have 3 minutes, so in the remaining 30 seconds, I will say that the NATO summit was not just about this political recommitment, important as it is. It was also about matching these words with deeds, and that's when the 2030 agenda that was already mentioned comes in. There were a number of very important and I would say very concrete steps to ensure that we can do even more together as an alliance. So there were 8 areas of decision making, so there's no way I can summarize it in 3 minutes, but if I wanted to just give you a sense of the direction of travel, one, there was this very important political recommitment saying, yes, NATO is the essential, is the unique platform for transatlantic consultation on all issues that affect our security and defense, from climate change and security to economic matters related to security, so very strong commitment to using NATO more as the political military alliance that it is, but then also doing more together by continuing to strengthen our defense and deterrence posture, stepping up our level of ambition on resilience, on climate change and security, on defense innovation, and matching all this with also an ambition to really engage more broadly with like-minded partners near and far, from Sweden and Finland to Australia and Japan, because we recognize that our security also depends on having this strong global partnership and standing up together for the rules-based international order. And I think that's all I have time for now, but there will be Q&A. So in short, it's a very good moment for transatlantic relations.
Of course, that's why the Prague European Summit is taking place now. You have obviously mentioned one of the most important things, that is that the shift in the global balance of power, it's necessitating a close cooperation. We cannot deal with those issues in separation. And also, maybe you should have mentioned that the summit on the 14th of June has been also dealing with international trade, which shows the many aspects that NATO is covering. Francis.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to talk to you all. I think that what we saw in June during the President's tour of Europe was a reaffirmation of the transatlantic partnership as a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. But beyond that, I think that it's important to note that the Biden administration is the first U.S. administration to consciously seek to elevate the role of the European Union in the transatlantic partnership. We saw this in the summit declaration, where it was not only just about trade and tech, which traditionally has been the way that many American leaders have viewed the EU, although perhaps the most important outcome of the summit was the establishment of the Trade and Tech Council, but we also saw a very real emphasis on climate, COVID, and foreign policy. I think as well, the decision alongside the summit of the United States to seek an administrative agreement with the European Defense Agency and join the Military Mobility PESCO project. These are indications of a serious approach by the administration to the, shall we say, harder security elements of the European Union. The summit declaration as a whole showed the broad scope of the relationship and its incredible density. But now, the point is that the hard work really has to start. Aside from the 10 working groups set up under the TTC, there are 10 dialogues that were set up across a whole range of issues by the summit declaration. And at this point, the United States does not have, the US administration does not have the personnel in place to cope with all of this. Appointments are taking a phenomenally long time. People like Matt Boyza are working 24/7 to keep everything going, but they need more people on board, and particularly among the leadership in the State Department, but the many other departments across the administration that are involved in these efforts with the EU. We still don't have a formally nominated ambassador to the European Union, and that person is unlikely to be in Brussels until the fall, perhaps the end of the year. So with this huge range of issues and so few people, we have to pick priorities. So my 4 priorities would be, 1, focus on getting potentially poisonous issues resolved. So we have done that with Airbus Boeing, basically by kicking the can down the road for 5 years when neither this commission nor this administration, the current Biden administration, will be in office. Steel and aluminum tariffs remains a very big issue. Hopefully we can get that resolved by the end of the year, but it is also very much tied up on the American side with the design of a new trade policy by the Biden administration, which is far more inward-looking than traditional American trade policies. The issue of data transfer, the Schrems, following the Schrems II decision, is huge and not going as well as one would hope. And we now currently are seeing a very public debate about digital taxes, which I think is the most urgent issue to get a joint understanding about. So priority number 2 would be to focus on areas where the US and the EU together can have a huge impact globally, and where we have a more positive agenda and I think can get some good wins. So I would point to the issues in the US-EU summit declaration, such as WTO reform, where we can see, and COVID, post-COVID recovery, where we can see some very much similarities of approach, but where we need to figure out how this works globally. Tech resilience, the resilience of our tech infrastructure is, I think, a key issue in this area. Priority number 3, targeted foreign policy issues. And I think from an American perspective, the issue is, where does the EU really play seriously and affect what the United States is doing in a particular foreign policy area? And there I would point to what Europeans would consider mostly neighborhood issues. Is this an opportunity to get the Balkans on the right track? What can we do about Ukraine at this point? Belarus, Turkey, the southern neighborhood. Notice I didn't point automatically to China and Russia. I think there are things in our tech resilience strategy, for example, reform of the WTO, which certainly address the issues related to China, but we can talk more about this prioritization in the Q&A. Finally, my last priority, number 4, is something that has emerged as clearly close to President Biden's heart, and that is the state of our democracies, both democracy around the world, but also the state of democracy inside the EU and inside the United States. And here I think that I was very glad to see in the summit declaration the promise to work together on the summit of democracies. We'll have to see how that summit evolves, aiming at early 2022. But I think that here there is a much based on our shared values that we can do together. And it's important to do it internally, domestically, and meet our own domestic challenges, as well as to help democracy thrive around the world. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listing the 4 priorities. I think that we can share them, and I'm sure that we will come back to them in the subsequent debate. Roland, you are the last one in a row.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan. Thanks for having me. Great to be here, even if only virtually. And you know, being a think tanker has its perks, because I can be unabashedly pessimistic. And I would like to abuse that privilege here by saying that, yes, indeed, the arrival of the Biden administration has given transatlantic relations a new lease on life, I would say. But we can still bungle it. I'm not saying we will, but we should, after all these nice words we just heard, we should be aware that if things remain the way they are right now, we probably will bungle it. And when I say we, I'm giving a deliberately imbalanced point of view because I'm addressing myself mainly to the Europeans. Now, the Biden administration has taken a huge step towards Europe after 4 admittedly difficult and traumatic years. But let's also keep in mind that the Biden administration has huge domestic challenges also as regards foreign policy. You know, they will have to prove that their more positive and more constructive approach actually renders more results than the brutal arrogance of Trump. My second point is Europe as a whole, as things stand, is still not responding adequately. It is responding, but is not responding adequately to this new situation. And this concerns defense spending and burden sharing, which, you know, where the transatlantic disagreements go back for several decades, ever since the beginning of the West in its modern form, I would say. But we're still not there where we need to be. China, indeed, Fran, I understand that maybe we should leave it aside for the moment, but I do think this is the central geopolitical issue in transatlantic relations. And in China, we have a very, very risky situation where European talk, and I'm quoting Chancellor Merkel here, where European talk about not decoupling at any price and preventing at any cost a new Cold War actually ends up in enabling China to divide and rule, because that's what it means. You know, it's at a certain point, it will be either or. Either we have a united West vis-a-vis China, or we allow China to divide us. And this talk about avoiding a new Cold War means exactly this. And then there is global democracy support, where I see a lacking enthusiasm, at least on the part of many Europeans. And finally, of course, the trade-related issues, where I think the hottest ones are regulation in the big tech field and taxation of big tech companies. So there are 3 potential pitfalls that Europeans will have to avoid if they want to make something out of this chance that we're given now. And that is complacency, delusion, and defeatism. What do I mean? Complacency means like we don't have to really try hard. You know, Trump wronged us so much. Biden is just bringing things back to some kind of status quo ante. And anyway, it's the Americans who have to kiss and make up and not us. That is what I call complacency. And again, looking at the international context, looking at the threats to the West, and looking at the domestic situation in the United States, this won't cut it. Second, delusion, or should I say illusion. You know, I'm getting at some ideas that are very popular in Paris these days, which are basically saying Europe can and should defend itself entirely, which usually confuses territorial defense which is only possible within NATO, with the question of stabilizing the neighborhood, especially the southern neighborhood, and using security and defense mechanisms for that. These are two different things, and usually in places like Paris, these are easily conflated, and we pretend that we can somehow take care of our own security within the next 20 years, which is not the case. And third, defeatism, well, I'm not putting a name tag to this attitude, but it says that basically China is already too strong to resist it, that Europe will never follow the lead of the United States and all this talk, and therefore we basically have to develop our own mechanisms of dealing with threats to democracy and threats to our interests. And you know, in the end, in the final account, these answers always end up in basically accommodation, not to say appeasement. So complacency, delusion, defeatism, very often we have combinations of several of those, and this is what we really have to be aware of. I would say that at the very end, the chance that we're given now must be used to create a transatlantic relationship which even a post-Biden administration, and this could be Trump, this could be DeSantis, whoever, a Republican-led administration will have a hard time to completely ditch it out of self-interest, out of even a kind of America First attitude. So we must create these conditions today, and we have to do it together, because otherwise we're doomed. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, Roland. Obviously, as always, provocative. There is nothing to do about it. I like your complacency, delusion, and defeatism. And why don't we start with these last words, Matthew? What is your reaction on the last remarks from Roland, from the U.S. point of view?
What was the first one?
Delusion.
Delusion. Well, delusion was the second one, right?
Complacency.
Complacency.
Are we
was
complacent?
The first. Well, we can't be complacent. We can't afford to be complacent because I mean the challenges are so many and so great that any sort of instinct in that direction will become a self-fulfilling prophecy, and we'll end up whatever losing or and so I mean I think that's I mean I hope that our political leaders and our elites and our societies grasp that it is not time to be complacent. On the contrary, it's a time to address these issues full on. On the delusion, I mean this kind of gets into a little bit of the strategic autonomy issue. Which we've of course been following with great interest. Fran mentioned it a bit. It is something which is which we're grappling with. We have our doubts about it. We welcome the cooperation the increasing cooperation that NATO and the EU have been showing, particularly on the military mobility issue. That is really important. Finally, after I was dealing with the EU 10 years ago, and we were talking about EU-NATO cooperation, and here it is 10 years later, and we're not exactly that much further along, I'm afraid, but we are further along because you've been working on it, and and this is a concrete result of it. Great, but still, the point is that we often think of this. This has a kind of also a bit of a very strong military dimension for us. And it's very hard for us to, since so much of the at least the military capacities that we have are cooperative and international, multinational, it's very hard for us to imagine that serious military capabilities can be produced only on the continent of Europe. Because every serious weapon system involves Canada, it involves Norway, it involves Turkey, it involves Britain, it involves the United States, or in some combination or permutation of the above. And so it would seem to me that that would be, that recognition of the serious, scientific and industrial and technological and innovation, research R&D capacities of these major outside Europe, power centers, Canada, Norway, Britain, Turkey and the United States, that we have to utilize those, otherwise this whole strategic autonomy idea doesn't go anywhere. And then, sort of the third one, what was that?
Defeatism.
Defeatism, yes, yeah, that is, we do hear that, don't we? And it's not I can't quite understand it. It's a going-in position is that we're going to lose this, and we are involved, as Roland says, in a serious struggle between democracies and autocracies and dictatorships. And do we want to live in the multilateral sort of the global the rules-based international order that we have created together over the course of the post-war period has actually served us incredibly well. It's been unprecedented in terms of peace and prosperity, and people may complain about it from time to time, but it isn't perfect, but it is certainly a lot better than the alternative, that we see alternative power centers trying to create before our eyes. And so if our going in position is that system is the future, then I just can't imagine that's the case, because we've overcome so many things in the past and we have to do this in the future.
Yes, thank you very much. Any of the panelists, if you want to say, if you have a comments, please raise your hands and I will give you the word. The same goes, please, for the audience. I have some questions here, but if you want to ask questions, raise your hands and obviously we will give you the mic. I see that our Italian friend is here.
Italian friend is indeed here. No, I'll be very quick. I just wanted to echo what has been said about this very disappointing trio of bad attitudes that Europeans shouldn't have looking at the future. And I wanted to say, I think complacency is obviously a risk. It's one where I think we can also, on the other hand, show that there has been progress, and that very concretely, since 2014, European allies and Canada have added over 200 billion extra on our common defense. The trend continues to rise, even with the difficulties posed by the pandemic. There is a continued commitment to continue to invest in our defense. So the trend on burden sharing is, we're not there. I will not say we're there, but the trend is positive, and I sincerely think that this is not going to change, to the contrary. And then, of course, also the decision at the summit to invest more in NATO, in the alliance. So these are elements of how you don't build complacency, by actually continuing to understand that we do need to do more when it comes to European allies in Canada. On the delusion, there's so much to say, but I just want to echo, I think it's incredibly important that we all work together when it comes to the common defense of Europe. We also have to be very, very realistic about where we start. Today, 80% of the resources for the defense of Europe come from non-EU NATO allies, 80%. So I think we need to be really, really careful about how we phrase this, and shine away from false dichotomies or false choices or ideas that we should seek in a world of ever-growing interdependence. We should seek to break away or decouple. I think that's incredibly dangerous and not a discourse that should be embraced. Luckily, I think that the very solid and concrete NATO-EU cooperation, for example, shows there is a completely different and very positive way to think about European defense, one in which EU efforts on defense build and add on our common defense, do not detract and create competition. And I think that's really the right mindset and the one we need to pursue. Otherwise, I think we'll pay a high price, and I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I will come back to you afterwards on one of the questions about NATO and the Chinese Sea. So we will come to it. Francisca and Rus, Iran. We have been talking a lot about Russia, China. Nobody mentioned Iran. Obviously, Iran is a major issue. How is the position of the EU going to change now with the new US administration, and how are they going to work together with the Biden administration? I will start with you, Ruth. Please be short, we have only 20 minutes left. I cannot. Sorry, I can't hear you. Okay, can we fix, please, the sound, and I will go to Francesca, please. Francis, please.
So I think that the Biden administration is very much boxed in on the question of Iran. It's going to be incredibly difficult for the administration to go really far forward. I don't disagree. I think that the intention is very real to find some arrangement that will address not only the nuclear issue, but also some of Iran's behavior in the region. And I think that's an issue that the Trump administration essentially moved the goalposts in the American political system for what is acceptable in dealing with Iran. So this is going to be a very real challenge. I don't think it's going to be solved anytime soon. And it probably will take a crisis in terms of the Iranian nuclear development for us to come to the table together, all of us, and to make this work. But I think that is one of the most difficult issues that we face together. I think one of the important things, though, is that right now the intention of the US government is to work with the EU to find a solution.
Yeah, I fully agree with you. We are always saying that we have to work together on China and Russia. If we don't, it's, we are going to lose the game. I think Iran here is equally important in this, and we have to work together on Iran. Ruth, do you have the sound now? Can you give us your comment from the EU side?
God damn it.
Does it work? No. Then, Roland, do you want to take have a go at it?
Yeah, I can try. I mean, I totally agree. Iran is the big unknown, where actually both the administration are in a very, very situation. The factor, the interior developments.
Oh dear.
Well, we are losing you, so I don't hear you at all. I think the internet. Okay, we will leave it. We will go to. We will continue. Let's hope that the technicians are going to repair this. Matthew, the whole question of TTC, the new kind of trade relations, and TTIP in the past.
Oh dear.
I know, it's oh dear, but it's important. It's important for the business, and the business community has been fully supporting, on both sides of the Atlantic, the TTIP. We wanted to have a comprehensive agreement with the United States. We believe that's extremely important, and so it was. And it was off the table together with the TPP. Just by the way, we can also come to the TPP. Is the TTC something that can replace potentially, at least partly? It's a different way, it works in the silos, etc. But can it potentially replace what we have expected from TTIP?
The reason I said oh dear is because I don't actually deal with the EU directly. I deal more with Eastern flank countries as well as.
So look at it from the Eastern flank countries.
But I would offer only just one comment that you cannot sort of overestimate how much the administration has bought into the relationship with the EU. This is really, really important for them. So the people who work on the EU issues, and so I after all the thought and all the energy and all enthusiasm that's going into this, I'm actually optimistic that it's going to amount to something, because we've had these false starts in the past, and we're now, we're in a new phase, a very positive phase, and this is something that I think at least from our perspective, we want it to work. So all I can, but we're just, it was just launched, just a few weeks ago. So it's not exactly there's not enough time to measure where it is. But I think that the factors that Fran described are real, and they testify. They reflect the ambition that the Biden administration is showing in this. And so all I can do is express optimism.
Well, I can tell you that from the business community and from all of us in Europe, right, we hope that your expression of optimism is correct. You want to have a word on it, please? Again, we have problems with the sound. Francis.
There. Can you?
Okay. Now, yes. But we didn't hear the beginning.
No, that's fine. I wanted just to follow up on Matt's comments. I think that TTIP, there's no appetite in the United States right now for major trade deals. There is an appetite for working together with like-minded partners. I would include the G7, but predominantly the EU in this, to focus not so much on our own interconnections, they're vitally important, but how we organize our trading relationships in a post-COVID world with a major trading systemic rival such as China. I don't mean to say that we shouldn't think about China or deal with China, but the way to effectively address China as partners is often going to be by addressing the rules and by strengthening the multilateral system that we both support. In Europe, you have a lot of new rules, Sustainable Finance Initiative, the toolbox for 5G security, investment reviews that are not about China, but certainly affect the way that China can do business in the EU. And I think it's this type of challenge. How do we protect our citizens without being protectionists? In the tech area, in the health area, in the trade area. Those are the issues that I think are top of political agendas today, rather than a comprehensive US-EU trade agenda, which was always going to be tough because it's very difficult when two behemoths, which is what we are, two behemoths try and negotiate. It's much easier to negotiate with when it's an unequal relationship. So.
Yeah, in a certain way, it's interesting what you are saying, that it's the third party that is pushing us somewhere. You remember in the 90th, TABD and the other things, they were not successful. We have all hoped that TTIP will result in something, and now we have a third party. I don't want to name them again, and because of the third party, because we start to work together. And there is no doubt about it. I was always surprised, and please answer me if you agree or disagree, that when I look at the TTC, it speaks about avoiding future barriers to trade. It doesn't speak about eliminating existing barriers to trade. Is that the spirit of the cooperation?
I think it would be nice to eliminate existing barriers, but I think everyone realizes the high political costs that would involve on agriculture, for example, in both our political worlds. That would be a real challenge. Trade negotiators have long said that it's much easier to remove the barriers on emerging technologies and new areas where there are not already stakeholders. Yes. So I think that is the intention in the declaration, but I think even more importantly, the ambitions of the declaration are about structuring or refining the rules of international engagement at the WTO and elsewhere in ways that will preserve the multilateral and open trading system that we know today, at least to the extent that we can in the post-COVID era.
Thank you very much. Let's go back to NATO and to China. There's a question here. How will NATO work together against Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea? Is there a unified message from the transatlantic community?
Sure, so that's a very important subject, of course. So I think just to provide a little bit of context, China comes to the NATO political agenda for the first time in a substantial way at the summit in December 2019 in London. So it has not been a long time. And back then, the starting point was we recognize that China's rise, that the rise of China presents challenges and opportunities to our security, and we want to look at what those are together. Now, fast forward to June, I think that it's fair to say that there's been a tremendous amount of progress in relatively short time, with allies working behind closed door at NATO to understand what the impact of China's rise will be on our security, and also, and of course, through understanding together, these are the building blocks of building a common situational awareness, which is the building block of forging a closer outlook and ultimately a closer approach. So where we are today on China is that allies continue to say, NATO doesn't see China as its adversary or its enemies. We do and we will engage with China based on our interests when it is our interest to do so, for example, on climate change and security. At the same time, we do recognize that we have to be clear-eyed when it comes to the challenges that China's rise poses to our security. We have to recognize China's role in pushing against the rules-based international order. We have to recognize there are coercive elements in Beijing's policies that do affect our security and our democracies, and we're going to come together to not just understand, but ultimately forge a common approach. So on the way forward, I'll get to the South China Sea, but in order to get there, we have to start with where we are today. I think looking forward, allies are going to agree a new strategic concept next year, which will be an important opportunity for them to come together and really talk about how do they see China. And to close, because I know time is very short, this is not about China's expanding, but it is about NATO. This is not about NATO going to China and expanding, but it is about China coming closer to us, and it is about us standing for our values, for example, freedom of navigation whenever they are threatened, because they're very important to our collective security. That's all I can say in 2 minutes on China.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry, I see here that we have 10 minutes. In fact, something is wrong here, and we have already, we are 10 minutes over our time. Let me, but we could go with this discussion on and on because there are so many issues, so many questions in this. But let me ask you a last question to each of you, and I would like to have a very short answer. One of you has mentioned that those 4 years of the Biden administration are absolutely essential to build a relation between the United States and Europe in such a way, or such a relation, that it can last through the next US administration, being it another Trump, being it whatever it is. What are the key points from each of you on which we can build such a relation? What are from your point of view, the key points on which, key basis on which we can build such a relation, such a lasting relation? Roland, I will go to you last, and I will start with Matthew, please.
Well, I would hope that we have a bit more confidence in our future. Because I mean, you know, I know there are people who are looking with some concern about what's happening in the United States, but I would give us a little bit more credit, and that, I mean, I take the point. I mean, it's, you know, obviously we got to use the 4 years that we have to make the most of it. But I mean, to automatically assume that what comes after is going to be worse is I think also, I don't buy that analysis. I mean, it's of course possible, but I mean, let's not dwell on it so heavily that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because we're in the United States, we also have people looking at Europe and listening to what you're saying, and so give us a little bit more credit than that. But let's use the 4 years we have and make the most of them.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want to hear. Benedetta?
Very quickly, yes, I agree. This is about this is about how do you weather-proof your alliance, and I think this is not about just one side of the Atlantic. We need to be aware that there can be changing political winds on both sides, and we need to future-proof it. I think the way is to, if you are worried about this changing political winds, invest in the institutions, invest into NATO, show up and continue to invest in defense. And to close, because I know we're very short on time, let's work seriously to forge a common approach to how do we deal with systemic competition.
That's a very good point. Ruth, do you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, but be very short,
okay,
please.
Great. Finally, I apologize for coming in and out. I would say strengthening democracy at home and globally, strengthening the institutions and people-to-people dialogue. I think, the US is changing, the EU is changing, and I think we need to invest in keeping an understanding on both sides. So we keep this mirror reflecting not only the US looking towards the EU and the member states, but also us on our side looking to the other side of the mirror.
Francis? Short, please.
So I will end where I started with 4 quick points. First, I think it's important that we understand that we won't always agree, but that we share a basic understanding of the world. We will disagree, but that doesn't mean divorce. The partnership is stronger than that. I think we need to reaffirm in word and deed the global post-COVID economy. And unlike many panels I've been on recently, we haven't spoken a great deal about tech and digital policy, and that will be key, along with WTO reform in doing that. I would underscore what's been said about democracy, because that's the way to prevent the scenario that you talked about in 4 years. And finally, addressing systemic rivals. How do we do that together? What are the strengths each of us brings to that?
Thank you very much. Roland, 1 sentence, if you can.
Yeah, Europeans need to prove that they can be an added value, not only to the people in Washington, New York, and San Francisco, but before doing anything important in transatlantic relations, every European, ideally, should take the Alabama town hall test. In other words, ask themselves, can I explain that what we're doing now, the way the EU is acting, is also in the interests of the average citizen of the state of Alabama or Texas or anywhere else in the so-called flyovers. So I wish this became a maxim of European policy.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very interesting debate. If I should summarize it in 1 sentence, I would say what I always believed, that the United States and EU have to work together. We don't have any other choice. We don't have any other allies. We don't have any other friends in the world. We are the only ones who share, in fact, values and other aspects. So let's continue. Now we have a great opportunity. Thank you to all the panelists.